Colorado Territory, 1875. The unforgiving glare of the summer sun beat down on the dusty town of Silverridge as Brendan Scott stared at the approaching stagecoach with hardened eyes. At 25, his youthful features belied the weight he carried in his soul. The war had been over for a decade, but the battles still raged within him. His lean, muscular frame tensed as the coach drew nearer, his clean-shaven face set in a stoic mask that had become as much a part of him as the Colt revolver at his hip. "No good ever comes rolling in on those wheels," he muttered to himself, adjusting his worn Stetson. A light breeze ruffled his sandy brown hair as he leaned against the hitching post outside the general store. In Silverridge, strangers meant trouble and trouble meant death. Brendan had seen enough death to last several lifetimes. The frontier was no place for softness or sentimentality. A man survived by keeping to himself and trusting no one. Brendan had learned that lesson the hard way when he'd watched his father gunned down over a land dispute 7 years prior. Since then, he'd built walls around himself as impenetrable as the mountain ranges surrounding the valley. "Looking mighty serious there, Brendan," called Sam Wilson, the aging proprietor of the general store. "Something on your mind?" Brendan shrugged without turning, just wondering what kind of trouble that coach is bringing us this time. Sam chuckled. "Could be supplies, could be a mail-order bride. Not everything's trouble, son." But Brendan knew better. In his experience, connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got you killed in the West. His ranch 10 miles outside of town was his sanctuary, the only place he felt safe. Alone but safe, and that was enough, it had to be. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust. The driver secured the reins and climbed down to open the door. Brendan was about to turn away when the first passenger emerged, and the world seemed to slow. She stepped down carefully, one gloved hand accepting the driver's assistance. Her forest green traveling dress was dusty from the journey, but elegantly tailored to her slender form. She couldn't have been more than 22. As she lifted her face to survey the town, Brendan caught his breath. Her features were delicate yet determined, framed by waves of rich chestnut hair partially visible beneath her modest hat. Her eyes, even from a distance, held an intensity that made him inexplicably uneasy. "Who's that?" he asked, trying to sound disinterested. Sam peered through the store window. "Must be Harper O'Malley, doctor's niece from Boston." "He's been expecting her." Harper O'Malley, the name settled in Brendan's mind like an unexpected guest. He watched as she instructed the driver about her trunks, her posture straight and confident despite the obvious exhaustion of long travel. "What's a Boston lady doing in Silverridge?" Brendan's tone held suspicion. "Doc Jacobs is getting on in years. Word is, she's a trained nurse coming to help in his practice." Sam gave him a knowing look. "Not everyone's running from something, Brendan." Brendan finally turned away. Everyone's running from something, some just don't know it yet. As he untied his horse, he felt a strange, prickling sensation at the back of his neck. Looking up, he found Harper O'Malley's gaze fixed directly on him. For one unguarded moment, their eyes met across the dusty street. She didn't smile or nod, just looked at him with frank curiosity. Brendan quickly broke the connection, mounting his horse with practiced ease. The sooner he got back to his ranch, the better. Silverridge was too small for strangers with probing eyes, especially beautiful ones. What Brendan couldn't know, was that the arrival of Harper O'Malley would challenge everything he believed about survival on the frontier. The walls he'd built were about to face their greatest test. Harper O'Malley surveyed the dusty main street of Silverridge with a mixture of trepidation and determination. At 22 years old, she had left behind everything familiar to come to this remote corner of Colorado Territory. Boston, with its cobblestone streets and society parties, seemed a lifetime away now. Miss O'Malley, a gray-haired man, approached, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "I'm your uncle, Thomas Jacobs." Harper returned his smile with genuine warmth. "Uncle Thomas, thank you for having me." As they exchanged greetings, Harper couldn't help but notice the tall, brooding man mounting his horse across the street. Something about his rigid posture and guarded expression caught her attention. Unlike the curious stares of the other townsfolk, his gaze held something different, wariness, perhaps even resentment. "Who is that man?" she asked quietly as her uncle directed the loading of her trunks onto his wagon. Dr. Jacobs followed her gaze. "That's Brendan Scott, owns a cattle ranch outside of town. Keeps to himself, mostly." "He seems," Harper searched for the right word. "Haunted," her uncle supplied. War and personal tragedy will do that. He's a good man, though. Just wounded in ways that don't show. He helped her onto the wagon seat. Don't take it personally if he seems unfriendly. He's that way with everyone. As they pulled away, Harper watched Brendan Scott ride in the opposite direction, his straight back and proud carriage speaking of a strength that intrigued her. In Boston, she had grown weary of polished gentlemen whose greatest hardship was a poor hand at cards. There was something authentic about the rawness she sensed in Brendan Scott. "I came here to make a difference," Harper said, turning to her uncle, "to help people who truly need it." Thomas Jacobs patted her hand. "And you will, my dear, but remember what I wrote to you, this isn't Boston. The frontier demands different strengths. People here carry their pain differently." Harper nodded, thinking of her own carefully guarded secrets. "I understand pain, uncle, more than most might guess." 2 weeks later, Harper had settled into a routine at her uncle's clinic. The work was demanding but fulfilling in a way her nursing in Boston never had been. Here, people needed her skills desperately. There was no army of doctors to consult, no modern hospital equipment. Just her knowledge, her hands, and her determination. She was organizing supplies one afternoon when the clinic door burst open. 2 men supported a third between them, blood soaking through his shirt. "Doc," one called urgently. "Luke's been gored by a bull." Harper rushed forward as her uncle emerged from the back room. "Put him on the table," she directed, already reaching for scissors to cut away the bloodied shirt. The injured man was pale and semi-conscious, a horrific wound torn across his abdomen. As Harper worked alongside her uncle to clean and assess the damage, she was vaguely aware of another presence entering the clinic. "How bad is it?" a deep voice tense with concern. Harper glanced up briefly to see Brendan Scott, his hat in his hands and worry etched across his features. His eyes met hers for a brief moment before returning to the injured man. "He's one of your ranch hands?" Dr. Jacobs asked, not looking up from his work. Brendan nodded. "Luke Daniels, best wrangler I have." Harper worked methodically, her hands steady despite the severity of the injury. "The wound is deep, but it appears to have missed vital organs," she said, her voice professional and calm. "If we can prevent infection, he has a chance." For hours, Harper and her uncle worked to save Luke Daniels' life. Brendan remained silent and watchful, occasionally stepping outside only to return and resume his vigil. Finally, with the wound cleaned, stitched, and bandaged, Dr. Jacobs stepped back. "We've done what we can. The rest is up to him and God." Harper began cleaning up the bloody instruments and cloths. "He'll need constant monitoring tonight. I'll stay with him." Her uncle shook his head. "You've been working since dawn. I'll take the first shift. You rest and return at midnight." When Dr. Jacobs stepped out to wash up, Harper became acutely aware of Brendan's presence. He stood by the window, his profile illuminated by the late afternoon sun. Despite his obvious concern for his ranch hand, he maintained a careful distance from her. "Your ranch hand is strong," Harper said, breaking the silence. "That's in his favor." Brendan turned, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "You handled yourself well. Most women would have fainted at the sight." Harper straightened her spine. "I'm not most women, Mr. Scott. I've seen worse in Boston hospitals." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed his face. "Luke has no family. If he lives, it'll be because of you and your uncle." "When he lives," Harper corrected, "not if." For the first time, Brendan's expression softened slightly. "When," he agreed. Later that night, Harper returned to relieve her uncle. The clinic was quiet, lit only by a single lamp. To her surprise, Brendan was still there, seated in a chair by Luke's bedside. "You should go home and rest," she said softly, checking Luke's pulse and temperature. Brendan shook his head. "My men are my responsibility." Harper worked in silence, changing bandages and administering laudanum when Luke stirred in pain. Brendan watched her movements, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You're different from what I expected," he finally said. Harper raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect, mister?" "Scott." "A delicate eastern flower who'd wilt in the first Colorado winter." His tone wasn't unkind, merely matter-of-fact. Harper smiled slightly. "Perhaps I'm stronger than I look." "Perhaps you are." By morning, Luke's fever had broken, and his breathing had steadied. When Dr. Jacobs pronounced him likely to recover, Brendan finally agreed to return to his ranch, but not before giving Harper a nod that contained more respect than any flowery compliment she'd received in Boston. What neither of them realized was that this night marked the beginning of a shift, a hairline crack in the walls Brendan had built around himself, and a challenge to Harper's belief that she could keep her own secrets buried in this small frontier town. 3 days later, Brendan returned to check on Luke, who was recovering remarkably well under Harper's care. He found her alone in the clinic, carefully writing in a patient ledger. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching the auburn highlights in her chestnut hair. "Miss O'Malley," he greeted, removing his hat. Harper looked up, a small smile touching her lips. "Mr. Scott, Luke is resting comfortably. Another week, and he should be able to return to light duties." Brendan nodded, suddenly finding himself at a loss for words. In the silence that followed, he became uncomfortably aware of how Harper's presence altered the familiar space of the clinic. She brought an energy that was both unsettling and strangely compelling. "I brought these," he finally said, placing a basket on her desk. "Fresh eggs and some beef from the ranch, for you and the doctor." Surprise flashed across Harper's face. "That's very kind, thank you." "It's nothing, just grateful for what you did for Luke." Brendan shifted his weight, fighting the urge to retreat. "How are you finding Silverridge?" Harper set down her pen. "Different from Boston, certainly. But there's something honest about it that I appreciate." Honest, Brendan couldn't help but ask. In Boston, everything is hidden behind politeness and propriety. Here, life and death are out in the open. Her green eyes met his directly. "People show their true nature more readily." Something about her directness challenged him. "And what is my true nature, Miss O'Malley, since you seem to be studying everyone so closely?" Instead of being flustered, Harper considered him thoughtfully. "Someone who carries heavy burdens alone, because he doesn't believe anyone else would be willing to share the weight." The accuracy of her assessment struck him like a physical blow. Brendan stiffened, regretting having engaged in conversation at all. "You presume a great deal for someone who's been here less than a month." "Perhaps," she conceded, "or perhaps some truths are universal, regardless of geography." Before Brendan could respond, the clinic door opened as Dr. Jacobs returned from a house call. The moment of uncomfortable intimacy shattered, allowing Brendan to retreat behind his usual reserve. "Scott, good to see you," Dr. Jacobs greeted warmly. "How's the ranch?" "Manageable, though one man short," Brendan replied, grateful for the change in subject. "I should get back, daylight's wasting." As he turned to leave, he caught Harper watching him with that same penetrating gaze that seemed to see too much. He nodded stiffly and stepped out into the street, breathing deeply once outside. Harper O'Malley was dangerous, not in the way outlaws and rustlers were dangerous, but in a more insidious way. She made him think of possibilities he'd long since abandoned, made him feel things he'd taught himself not to feel, and that was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with the responsibilities and past that shadowed him. The ranch needed him. His men depended on him. There was no room in his life for distractions, especially ones with perceptive green eyes and a stubborn chin. What Brendan didn't know was that fate had other plans, plans that would throw him and Harper together in ways neither could anticipate. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, Silverridge was abuzz with preparations for the annual Founders' Day celebration. Despite his aversion to town gatherings, Brendan found himself obligated to attend. As the owner of one of the largest ranches in the area, his absence would be noted and possibly interpreted as an insult. The town square was transformed with bunting and lanterns. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every household, and a makeshift dance floor had been constructed near the band. Brendan kept to the periphery, exchanging brief greetings with neighbors and business associates. He was considering making an early exit when he spotted Harper across the square. She was speaking animatedly with Sarah Jenkins, the schoolteacher. Her dress was a deep blue that complemented her fair skin, and she'd arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun at the clinic. As if sensing his gaze, Harper looked up, meeting his eyes across the crowd. After a moment's hesitation, she excused herself from the conversation and made her way toward him. "Mr. Scott," she greeted. "I didn't expect to see you here." Brendan inclined his head. "Miss O'Malley, certain social obligations can't be avoided, it seems." Even by confirmed loners, there was a teasing light in her eyes. Despite himself, Brendan felt the corner of his mouth twitch, even by us. Harper glanced at the dance floor where couples were beginning to gather as the band struck up a lively tune. "Do loners dance, mister?" Scott. The question caught him off guard. It had been years since he'd danced with anyone. The thought of holding Harper in his arms, even in the formal context of a public dance, sent an unexpected jolt through him. "Not usually," he replied cautiously. Perhaps an exception could be made. Harper held his gaze steadily. "For social obligations, of course." Brendan knew he should decline. Every instinct honed by years of careful isolation urged him to retreat. And yet he found himself extending his hand. "For social obligations," he agreed quietly. Harper's hand felt small but surprisingly strong in his as he led her to the edge of the dance floor. The band was playing a waltz, and as he placed his hand at her waist, Brendan was acutely conscious of the proper distance between them and the eyes of the townspeople upon them. "You dance well for a loner," Harper observed as they moved smoothly among the other couples. "My mother insisted on lessons," Brendan found himself saying, "said no son of hers would shame her at social gatherings." "Tell me about her," Harper requested, her expression genuinely interested. Brendan hesitated. He rarely spoke of his family, especially to virtual strangers, and yet the music and the unexpected ease of Harper's company loosened something within him. She was strong, refined, but practical. "She came west as a bride and learned to survive, then thrive." A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. She could quote Shakespeare while mending fences and shoot a rattlesnake at 20 paces. Harper's eyes softened. "She sounds remarkable, is she?" "She died when I was 16, fever." The familiar pain surfaced, duller now with time but never truly absent. "I'm sorry," Harper said simply. After a moment she added, "My mother died when I was 12. It changes you, doesn't it? Makes you grow up faster than you should." The shared experience created an unexpected bridge between them. "Yes," Brendan agreed quietly. "It does." They danced in silence for several measures, the connection between them shifting into something more complex than mere acquaintance. "And your father?" Harper finally asked. Brendan's expression closed immediately. "That's a story for another time." Harper nodded, accepting the boundary. As the music ended, Brendan stepped back, releasing her. The moment had passed, the brief window of openness closing as swiftly as it had appeared. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Scott," Harper said formally, understanding intuitively that he needed the distance. Brendan inclined his head. "Miss O'Malley." He watched as she returned to her uncle's side, her blue dress swirling around her ankles. Something had changed during those few minutes on the dance floor, a realization that troubled him deeply as he made his way back to the shadows at the edge of the celebration. Harper O'Malley was becoming more than a name, more than the doctor's niece. She was becoming a person who mattered, and in Brendan's experience, caring for people only led to loss and pain. As he rode home later that night, the memory of Harper in his arms haunted him. The walls he'd built around his heart had served him well for years. He couldn't afford to let them crumble now, especially for a woman who, by all logic, belonged in the civilized East, not on the harsh frontier. What he didn't realize was that the seed had already been planted. Like the first tender shoot breaking through hard-packed soil after winter, something was beginning to grow between them, something that neither walls nor distance nor even his own determination could easily uproot. The following week brought unexpected challenges to Silverridge. Heavy rains swelled the creek that ran alongside the town to dangerous levels. Dr. Jacobs was called to attend to injuries as men worked to reinforce the banks and protect homes nearest the water. Harper was alone in the clinic when Mrs. Peterson burst in, panic written across her face. "Miss O'Malley, come quick, it's my boy Jimmy. He was helping with the sandbags when the bank gave way. He's trapped and the water's rising." Harper grabbed her medical bag without hesitation. "Where is he?" "Near the old mill, please hurry." By the time they reached the scene, a crowd had gathered. Jimmy Peterson, barely 12, was pinned beneath a fallen tree at the creek's edge. The rushing water was already reaching his chest and rising steadily with each passing minute. Harper assessed the situation rapidly. The boy was conscious but terrified, his leg trapped beneath the massive trunk. Several men were attempting to lift the tree, but without success. "We need more men," someone was saying, "and rope." "There's no time," Harper said, setting down her bag and kicking off her shoes. "That water's rising too fast." Before anyone could stop her, Harper waded into the creek, her skirts immediately becoming sodden and heavy. The current was strong, threatening to sweep her off her feet, but she pressed forward determinedly. "Jimmy," she called as she reached him, "I'm going to help you. Stay calm." The boy's face was pale with fear and pain. "My leg's stuck, Miss O'Malley. I can't feel it anymore." Harper examined the situation more closely. Jimmy's leg was pinned but not crushed. The tree had fallen in such a way that it created a small pocket. If she could slide him free while the men lifted even slightly. "I need everyone to lift on my count," she called back to the shore. "Just for a few seconds, I'll pull him free." The men positioned themselves along the tree trunk. Harper wrapped her arms around Jimmy's torso, bracing herself against the current. "Ready, 1, 2, 3. The men strained, managing to raise the tree just inches from the creek bed. It was enough. Harper pulled with all her strength, sliding Jimmy free and cradling him against her as they both fell backward into the swirling water. The current immediately caught them, sweeping them downstream. Harper kept a tight grip on the boy, struggling to keep both their heads above water as they were carried away from the horrified onlookers. "Hold on to me," she gasped, fighting against the pull of the water. Just as she feared they would be swept around the bend and out of sight of help, a powerful arm encircled her waist. Harper turned her head to find Brendan Scott beside her, his face grimly determined as he battled the current. "I've got you," he shouted over the roar of the water. "The boy, too." With seemingly superhuman strength, Brendan pulled them toward the bank, finding purchase on submerged rocks. When they reached shallower water, hands reached out to help them. Jimmy was lifted to safety first, then Harper, and finally Brendan, all three collapsing on the muddy bank. Harper immediately turned her professional attention to Jimmy, examining his leg through her sodden skirts. "No breaks, thank God. But we need to get him warm and dry." "Same goes for you," Brendan said, his voice rough with concern as he noticed her shivering. Mrs. Peterson was crying with relief as Jimmy was wrapped in blankets and carried toward home. Harper attempted to stand, only to find her limbs shaking too badly to support her. Without a word, Brendan scooped her up in his arms. "Doctor's clinic?" he asked. Harper nodded, too exhausted to protest. As he carried her through the crowd, she became aware of his solid warmth against her chilled body, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," Brendan said quietly as they made their way back to town. Harper managed a weak smile, perhaps a bit of both. "You could have died," his arms tightened almost imperceptibly around her. "So could Jimmy, it was worth the risk." Brendan fell silent, but Harper could feel the tension in his body. When they reached the clinic, he set her down carefully but kept a steadying hand at her elbow. "Your uncle's still out on calls. You shouldn't be alone," he said, hesitating at the doorway. Harper looked up at him, seeing the genuine concern beneath his usual reserve. "There's dry clothing in the back room. I can manage." Brendan nodded reluctantly. "I'll wait out here, just call if you need anything." 15 minutes later, Harper emerged in a fresh dress, her wet hair combed and braided. Brendan had built up the fire and the clinic was blessedly warm. "Thank you," she said, sinking gratefully into a chair by the fire. "For pulling us out, for bringing me back, for staying." Brendan remained standing, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Harper disagreed gently, "not anyone. It took courage to jump into that current." He turned to face her, something fierce in his expression. "You talk about courage after what you did. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? How easily you could have been killed?" The intensity of his reaction surprised her. "I'm a nurse, Mr. Scott. Saving lives is my calling." "And what about your own life?" His voice was low, almost angry. "Does that matter so little to you?" Harper met his gaze steadily. "Of course it matters, but I couldn't stand by and watch that child drown." "No, I suppose you couldn't." Brendan ran a hand through his still damp hair, his frustration visible. "That's the problem with you, isn't it? You care too much. You get involved. You risk yourself." "Is caring really such a problem?" Harper asked quietly. Brendan's expression darkened. "On the frontier, yes, caring gets you hurt." "Gets you killed." "Or it gives you something to live for," Harper countered. Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills, neither willing to concede. Finally, Brendan broke away, reaching for his hat. "Your uncle should be back soon." "Will you be all right until then?" Harper nodded, disappointed by his withdrawal but not surprised. "I'll be fine, thank you again, Mr. Scott." At the door, Brendan paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Try not to jump into any more flooded creeks, Miss O'Malley." There was something in his tone, a hint of reluctant admiration beneath the admonishment, that warmed Harper more than the fire. "I'll do my best, Mr. Scott." After he left, Harper sat by the fire, replaying the day's events. The terror of the rushing water, the weight of Jimmy in her arms, and most vividly, the solid strength of Brendan Scott as he pulled them to safety. She had seen something in his eyes today, a crack in the carefully maintained facade. For a brief moment, she had glimpsed the man beneath the walls, and what she saw intrigued her even more than before. Harper had come to the frontier to escape her own past, to build a new life away from painful memories and societal expectations. She had not come looking for connection, certainly not with a man as guarded as Brendan Scott. And yet, as she stared into the dancing flames, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, a pull that both thrilled and frightened her, because Harper had secrets of her own. Secrets that, if revealed, could destroy whatever fragile understanding was growing between them. News of Harper's bravery spread quickly through Silverridge. In the days that followed, townsfolk stopped by the clinic with small tokens of appreciation, freshly baked bread, preserved fruits, handcrafted items. Harper accepted their gratitude with grace, but found herself increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. "You're a local hero," Dr. Jacobs teased as yet another patient insisted on sharing their thanks before discussing their ailment. Harper smiled thinly. "I only did what was necessary, Uncle. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," he corrected, echoing Brendan's words. "You've got a rare courage, Harper. It reminds me of your mother." The mention of her mother brought a familiar ache. "She would have done the same," Harper agreed softly. A week after the incident, Harper was surprised to find Brendan Scott waiting outside the clinic as she closed up for the evening. He stood beside his horse, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Mr. Scott," she greeted, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at the sight of him. "Is everything all right? Is Luke having problems?" "No, nothing like that," Brendan assured her. "Luke's back to work, complaining about how the younger hands are doing everything wrong in his absence." Harper smiled. "That sounds promising. What brings you to town, then?" Brendan cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might like to ride out to my ranch tomorrow. If you're not needed at the clinic, that is." The invitation was so unexpected that Harper momentarily struggled to find words. "Your ranch?" "There's a family living on the far edge of my property. The mother's expecting, and she's been having a difficult time. I thought," he hesitated, "I thought you might be willing to check on her." Harper's initial surprise gave way to understanding. This wasn't a social call, it was a professional request. She ignored the twinge of disappointment. "Of course I'd be happy to help. What time should I be ready?" "I can come by around noon if that suits." "It's about an hour's ride." Harper nodded. "I'll prepare a bag with supplies. Thank you for thinking of her." Brendan settled his hat back on his head. "I'll see you tomorrow, then." As she watched him ride away, Harper couldn't help wondering about the real motivation behind his request. Was he genuinely concerned about the expectant mother, or was this his way of reaching out after their last intense encounter? Either way, the prospect of seeing Brendan's ranch, seeing the place that had shaped him, filled her with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The next day dawned clear and mild, perfect for riding. Harper dressed in her most practical skirt and sturdiest boots, packing medical supplies she thought might be needed for an expectant mother. As noon approached, she found herself checking the street more frequently than necessary. Brendan arrived precisely on time, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Daisy," he said as he helped Harper mount. "She's steady and even-tempered. Should give you no trouble." Harper stroked the mare's neck. "She's lovely, thank you for bringing her." As they rode out of town, Harper was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. The doctor's niece riding out alone with Brendan Scott would certainly fuel gossip, but the thought bothered her less than it perhaps should have. Once beyond the town limits, the landscape opened up dramatically. Rolling hills gave way to vast meadows, wildflowers painting splashes of color across the green canvas. In the distance, the mountains rose majestically against the clear blue sky, It's beautiful, Harper said softly, drinking in the vista. Brendan glanced at her, a hint of pride in his expression. This is just the beginning, wait until you see the valley. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves creating a soothing cadence. Harper found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since arriving in Colorado. How did you come to own your ranch? She finally asked, genuinely curious about his history. Brendan was quiet for so long that Harper thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing his words. My father staked the original claim after the war, the one with Mexico, not the recent unpleasantness. Built it up from nothing, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When he died, it passed to me. You've continued his legacy, Harper observed. I've expanded it, Brendan corrected. Doubled the acreage, tripled the herd. What he started, I've made stronger. There was something in his tone that suggested this was more than mere pride in accomplishment, it was vindication of some kind. And before the war, what did you do? Harper asked, noting how he had mentioned his father's death but not when or how it occurred. Brendan's expression closed slightly. I rode with the Union cavalry, saw things no man should see. The war changed many people, Harper said quietly. Left scars that don't show on the outside. Brendan gave her a sharp look. You sound like you speak from experience. Harper met his gaze steadily. Boston had its own battles, Mr. Scott. Different from yours, but painful nonetheless. Before Brendan could inquire further, they crested a hill, and Harper gasped at the view that opened before them. A lush valley stretched below, a river winding through its center like a silver ribbon. Nestled in the heart of the valley was the Scott Ranch, larger and more impressive than Harper had imagined. The main house was 2 stories of solid timber construction, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings surrounded it, and in the distance Harper could see the cattle grazing on the verdant pastures. This is all yours, she asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. Every acre, Brendan confirmed, a note of satisfaction evident. Built by Scott hands, protected by Scott guns. The last phrase caught Harper's attention, but before she could question it, Brendan was urging his horse forward, leading them down into the valley. As they approached the main house, several ranch hands paused in their work to observe their arrival. Harper noticed the respectful nods they directed toward Brendan and the curious glances at herself. Boss, one man greeted, stepping forward to take the reins of Brendan's horse. Didn't expect you back so soon. Change of plans, Mike, Brendan replied, dismounting smoothly before moving to help Harper. His hands were strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her down, lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Miss O'Malley has come to check on Maria Garcia, he explained to the hand. We'll rest the horses for a bit before riding out to their place. Inside, the ranch house was a revelation. Harper had expected a bachelor's sparse accommodations, but instead found a home that spoke of permanence and care. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, the floors covered with quality rugs, and the walls adorned with a mixture of practical items and decorative touches that suggested a woman's influence. Your mother, Harper guessed, noting a particularly fine needlepoint hanging beside the stone fireplace. Brendan nodded, a flash of remembered affection crossing his features. She believed that living on the frontier was no excuse for abandoning civilization entirely. In the kitchen, a middle-aged woman was preparing a meal. She looked up in surprise as they entered. Mr. Scott. I wasn't expecting you to bring a guest. Despite her words, she quickly wiped her hands and offered a warm smile to Harper. Mrs. Reynolds, this is Miss Harper O'Malley, the doctor's niece from Silverridge, Brendan introduced. Miss O'Malley, Mrs. Reynolds has managed my household for the past 5 years. It's a pleasure to meet you, Harper said sincerely. Your home is lovely. Mrs. Reynolds beamed. It's nice to finally have a young lady visit. Would you care for some refreshment before you continue on? Over cold lemonade and freshly baked biscuits, Harper observed the easy rapport between Brendan and his housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds clearly held genuine affection for her employer, treating him with a maternal fondness that he seemed to accept without the guardedness he showed to others. Miss O'Malley saved a boy from drowning last week, Brendan said unexpectedly as Mrs. Reynolds refilled their glasses. The older woman's eyes widened. Did you really? How brave. Harper flushed slightly. Mr. Scott exaggerates. He was the one who pulled us both to safety. After you waded into floodwater to free a trapped child, Brendan countered, a challenge in his eyes. Mrs. Reynolds looked between them with evident interest. Well, it sounds like you both showed remarkable courage. The territory needs more people willing to help others, if you ask me. As they prepared to depart for the Garcia homestead, Mrs. Reynolds pressed a basket of food into Harper's hands. For Maria and the children, she explained. And perhaps you might join us for supper when you return. I've a roast in the oven that's far too large for just Mr. Scott. Harper glanced at Brendan, who nodded his approval. That's very kind. Thank you. The Garcia homestead was a modest cabin about 3 miles from the main ranch house. As they approached, 3 young children playing outside spotted them and ran inside, presumably to alert their parents. A man emerged, thin but strong-looking, with a weathered face and cautious eyes that relaxed somewhat upon recognizing Brendan. Mr. Scott, he greeted, removing his hat. We were not expecting visitors. Eduardo, Brendan replied with a nod. This is Miss O'Malley. She's a trained nurse from Silverridge. I've brought her to see Maria. Eduardo's expression shifted to one of gratitude. You are most welcome, señorita. Maria has been unwell these past weeks. Please come inside. The interior of the cabin was simple but meticulously clean. Maria Garcia sat by the hearth, her advanced pregnancy evident beneath her loose dress. Her face was drawn with fatigue, but she managed a smile as Harper approached. Mrs. Garcia, I'm Harper O'Malley. Harper introduced herself gently. Mr. Scott was concerned about you and asked if I might help. Maria's surprised gaze flickered to Brendan, who remained near the doorway. That was kind of him, she said in accented English. He is a good patron. While Brendan spoke with Eduardo outside, Harper examined Maria thoroughly, asking careful questions about her symptoms and previous pregnancies. When she had finished, her concern had deepened. The baby is positioned incorrectly, she explained to Maria. That's why you're experiencing such discomfort. With your permission, I'd like to try to turn it. Maria nodded trustingly, and Harper proceeded with the delicate procedure. By the time Brendan returned to the cabin, Harper had successfully repositioned the baby, much to Maria's relief. You will need rest, Harper instructed, mixing herbs from her bag into a tea. This will help with the pain and strengthen both you and the baby. I'll leave enough for several days. As they prepared to depart, Eduardo gripped Brendan's hand firmly. Gracias, Mr. Scott, we are in your debt. Brendan shook his head. You work my land well, Eduardo. Your family is under my protection. There is no debt. Riding back toward the main house, Harper mulled over what she had witnessed. The interaction between Brendan and the Garcia family revealed a side of him she hadn't fully appreciated before, a sense of responsibility that extended beyond mere business arrangements. You care about them, she observed, the Garcias. Brendan kept his eyes on the trail ahead. They're good people, hardworking, loyal. And under your protection, Harper quoted. What did you mean by that? Brendan was silent for a long moment. The frontier isn't always kind to families like the Garcias. Some in these parts would see them driven off their land simply because of where they were born. But not you. No, Brendan said firmly. Not me. A man should be judged by his character and his work, not his birthplace or the color of his skin. Harper studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. That's an enlightened view for these parts. It's my father's view, Brendan said quietly, one of the few things we agreed on. The implication that there had been significant disagreement between Brendan and his father was not lost on Harper, but she sensed it wasn't the time to press further. As the main house came into view again, Brendan suddenly reined in his horse, gazing at the peaceful scene before them. This land, he said, his voice taking on an intensity Harper hadn't heard before, is everything to me. Not just the acres or the cattle or the buildings, it's freedom, independence. A place where I answer to no one but myself. Harper heard the unspoken addition, and where I can keep others at a safe distance. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. You've built something remarkable here. Rebuilt, Brendan corrected, a shadow crossing his features. After my father died, there wasn't much left. Before Harper could ask what he meant, Brendan urged his horse forward again, effectively closing the conversation. Supper with Mrs. Reynolds was a surprisingly pleasant affair. The housekeeper kept the conversation flowing with local stories and gentle inquiries about Harper's life in Boston. Brendan remained somewhat reserved, but occasionally contributed a dry observation that revealed a wit Harper had only glimpsed previously. As darkness fell, Brendan insisted on escorting Harper back to Silverridge himself, despite her protests that one of the ranch hands could accompany her. "I brought you out here. I'll see you safely home," he said with a finality that brooked no argument. The ride back was conducted mostly in silence, the moonlight casting long shadows across the trail. Harper found herself hyper-aware of Brendan's presence beside her, of the occasional brush of his leg against hers when the path narrowed. At the edge of town, Harper finally spoke. "Thank you for today. For trusting me enough to bring me to your home to meet the Garcias." Brendan glanced at her, his expression softened by the moonlight. "You helped Maria where I couldn't. It's I who should thank you." As they reached the doctor's house, Brendan dismounted quickly to help Harper down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Harper found herself looking up into his face, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Harper," he said quietly, the first time he had used her given name. Whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the door opening, spilling lamplight onto the porch as Dr. Jacobs emerged. "There you are." "I was beginning to worry," he nodded at Brendan. "Evening, Scott. Thank you for seeing her home safely." The moment broken, Brendan stepped back, his customary reserve falling into place like a shutter over a window. "Doctor." "Good night, Miss O'Malley." As he rode away, Harper felt the weight of words unspoken hanging in the air between them. Something had shifted today, boundaries had been crossed, glimpses exchanged of the people they were beneath their carefully maintained exteriors. What neither of them could know was how soon those barriers would be tested further, in ways that would force them both to confront the truths they kept hidden from each other and from themselves. The weeks that followed saw a subtle but significant change in the relationship between Harper and Brendan. He began to find reasons to visit Silverridge more frequently, supplies needed, messages to be delivered, patients to check on. Each visit inevitably included a stop at the clinic, where conversations that started as brief pleasantries gradually lengthened into genuine exchanges. Harper, for her part, found herself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that both excited and alarmed her. She had not come to Colorado Territory seeking attachment. Indeed, she had specific reasons for avoiding it, and yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward the complex, guarded rancher who was slowly revealing himself to her in measured glimpses. "You seem happier lately, Doctor," Jacobs observed one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner. "The frontier agrees with you." Harper smiled, sipping her tea. "I feel useful here, knighted." "It's more than that, I think," her uncle's eyes twinkled. "Might have something to do with a certain rancher who finds more reasons to come to town than he ever did before." Harper felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Scott has many business interests in Silverridge." "Indeed he does." Curiously, they all seemed to require his personal attention since about mid-July. Dr. Jacobs chuckled at Harper's embarrassed expression. "I'm not scolding, my dear. Brendan Scott is a good man for all his standoffishness. He's just complicated." "How so?" Harper couldn't help asking. Her uncle's expression grew thoughtful. "He carries burdens few know the full weight of. His father's death was difficult, violent. Left scars deeper than most realize." "He rarely speaks of his father," Harper noted. "No, he wouldn't," Dr. Jacobs sighed. "I attended the aftermath, wasn't pretty. Brendan was barely 18, home on leave from the army. Found his father shot to death on their own land." Harper's hand flew to her mouth. "That's terrible. Was the killer ever caught?" "There were suspicions, but no proof strong enough for action. Land disputes were common then." "Still are," her uncle patted her hand. "Just be patient with him, Harper. Walls built over years don't come down overnight." The conversation left Harper with a deeper understanding of Brendan's guardedness and a greater appreciation for the trust he was beginning to place in her. It also strengthened her resolve to be honest about her own past, eventually. The right moment hadn't yet presented itself, and Harper feared what the truth might do to their fragile connection. That opportunity arrived unexpectedly the following week. Harper was walking back from visiting a patient when she noticed an elegantly dressed stranger stepping down from the afternoon stage. Something about the man's bearing, confident to the point of arrogance, caught her attention. As he turned, surveying the town with a proprietary air, Harper froze in recognition. It couldn't be, not here thousands of miles from Boston, but it was. James Harrington, son of one of Boston's wealthiest families and the man she had fled across a continent to escape. Harper's heart hammered in her chest as she ducked into the alley beside the general store, pressing herself against the wall as she struggled to control her panic. What was he doing here? How had he found her? Taking several deep breaths, she forced herself to think logically. Perhaps it was coincidence. Harrington had business interests throughout the country. His presence might have nothing to do with her, but Harper knew better. James Harrington was not a man who accepted rejection or defeat. She had humiliated him in the eyes of Boston society, and he was not one to forget such an affront. She waited until he had entered the hotel before continuing to the clinic, her mind racing with implications. If Harrington was here for her, how would she handle it? What would she tell her uncle and Brendan? The thought of Brendan learning about her past from someone else sent a chill through her. Whatever fragile trust they had built would be shattered. For the remainder of the day, Harper moved through her duties in a fog of anxiety, startling at every sound. By evening, she had resolved to speak with her uncle, to prepare him for whatever storm might be brewing. But as she closed up the clinic, the door opened to reveal the last person she wanted to see. "Hello, Harper," James Harrington said, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. "What a surprise finding you in this charming little settlement." Harper straightened her spine, refusing to show fear. "Mr. Harrington, what brings you to Silverridge?" His smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Business, officially, unofficially, you of course. Did you really think you could simply disappear?" "I made my position quite clear before I left Boston," Harper said, keeping the counter between them. "Nothing has changed." Harrington stepped further into the clinic, his gaze traveling around the modest space with barely disguised disdain. "Look at you playing frontier nurse. How quaint, how beneath you." "I find my work here deeply satisfying," Harper replied, "more than I ever could as Mrs. James Harrington." His expression hardened. "Your father didn't share that view. In fact, he was most distressed by your impulsive departure." The mention of her father sent a wave of guilt through Harper. She had left only a letter explaining her decision, unable to face him directly with her refusal to marry as arranged. "My father will recover from the disappointment," she said more confidently than she felt. "Perhaps." Harrington moved closer and Harper resisted the urge to step back. "But will his business, your father's shipping company, is facing difficulties. Difficulties that my family's investment could easily resolve." The implication was clear, and Harper felt cold anger replace her fear. "So that's your strategy, threaten my father's livelihood to force my compliance." Harrington shrugged elegantly. "I prefer to think of it as aligning incentives. I want a wife of suitable breeding and beauty. Your father needs capital. You want your father to prosper. Everyone can have what they want." "Except me," Harper said bitterly. "What I want doesn't factor into your calculations, does it?" "Come now, Harper, be reasonable. What future do you imagine here? Treating miners and cowboys until you're old and gray? Marrying some uncultured frontier brute?" His lip curled in contempt. "You were born for better things." The clinic door opened again and Harper's heart sank as Brendan stepped in, his expression shifting from greeting to wariness as he assessed the scene before him. "Miss O'Malley," he said formally, his eyes never leaving Harrington. "Is everything all right?" Before Harper could respond, Harrington turned, extending his hand with practiced ease. "James Harrington of Boston, and you are?" "Brendan Scott." Brendan didn't take the offered hand. "You're a long way from Boston, Mr. Harrington." Harrington's smile was razor-sharp. "Business opportunities extend even to these remote regions, Mr. Scott, though I confess, reconnecting with an old friend is an unexpected pleasure." Brendan's gaze shifted to Harper, a question in his eyes. "Friend?" "Mr. Harrington and I were acquainted in Boston," Harper said carefully. "His visit is unexpected." "More than acquainted, surely," Harrington interjected smoothly. "Harper's father and mine have been business associates for years. In fact, until recently, Harper and I were to be married." The words landed like a physical blow. Harper watched as Brendan's expression closed completely, all warmth draining away as he absorbed this new information. I see, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. I apologize for interrupting. I'll return another time. Brendan, wait, Harper started, but he was already turning away. No need to leave on my account, Scott, Harrington called after him. I'm sure Harper would be delighted to introduce two such important men in her life. The calculated cruelty in Harrington's tone made Harper want to scream, but Brendan was already gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Harrington turned back to her, satisfaction evident in his smirk. Interesting, the frontier nurse and the local rancher, how predictable. Harper's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Get out. We're not finished discussing. We are finished. Get out now or I'll call the sheriff and report you for harassment. Harrington's amusement faded, replaced by something harder. This isn't over, Harper. I'll be in town for several days. Consider your options carefully. Your father's future and perhaps your own reputation hang in the balance. After he left, Harper sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The worst had happened. Brendan had learned about her past in the most damaging way possible. The look on his face, it was as if all the trust they had built had evaporated in an instant. She had to find him to explain, but what could she say? That she had fled an arranged marriage? That her father's financial future had been tied to that union? That she had chosen freedom over duty? None of it painted her in a particularly honorable light, and yet the alternative, letting Brendan believe she had deliberately concealed a fiancé, was worse. By the time Harper reached the street, there was no sign of Brendan. His horse was gone from the hitching post, suggesting he had left town immediately. The thought of riding out to his ranch crossed her mind, but darkness was falling, and confronting him at his home seemed an intrusion after what had just transpired. Tomorrow, she decided, she would seek him out tomorrow and try to explain, if he would listen. But morning brought unexpected complications. Word spread through Silverridge that James Harrington wasn't merely passing through, he was investigating potential investments in local mines and businesses. His presence at the hotel had already caused a stir among the town's merchants, eager for Eastern capital. Harper's heart sank as she realized Harrington was embedding himself in Silverridge, creating connections that would make it impossible for her to avoid him. It was a calculated move, designed to pressure her while simultaneously establishing himself as a respected figure in the community. 2 days passed with no sign of Brendan. Harper moved through her duties at the clinic mechanically, her mind constantly returning to the look on his face when Harrington had revealed their connection. She had written a letter explaining everything, but had no way to deliver it without causing more gossip. On the 3rd day, as Harper was closing the clinic for lunch, Sheriff Miller appeared at the door. Miss O'Malley, he greeted, removing his hat. Got a situation that could use your skills if you're available. Of course, Harper replied, reaching for her medical bag. What's happened? Accident at the Carson mine. Several men injured, one pretty bad. Doc's already headed there, but asked if you could come too. Within minutes, Harper was riding with the sheriff toward the mine, situated in the foothills outside of town. As they approached, she could see a crowd gathered near the mine entrance, men being carried out on makeshift stretchers. Her uncle was already attending to one miner, his expression grim as he worked. Harper, thank God. Take the man over there, leg crushed by falling timber. I've given him laudanum, but he'll need that leg set properly. For the next hour, Harper worked alongside her uncle, treating injuries ranging from minor cuts to life-threatening crush wounds. The worst cases would need to be transported to the clinic for further treatment. As she was finishing bandaging a miner's lacerated arm, a familiar voice made her look up. Need help with transport, Doc. Brendan stood at the edge of the clearing, several of his ranch hands behind him. He pointedly avoided looking directly at Harper. Dr. Jacobs nodded gratefully. Scott, good man. We've got 4 that need moving to town. Your wagon would be a blessing. Brendan nodded, gesturing to his men to assist. As they began carefully loading the injured miners, Harper approached him tentatively. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Brendan's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the task at hand. Just being neighborly, nothing more. Brendan, please, about what happened, what Mr. Harrington said. Not my business, he cut her off, his voice flat. Your past is your own, Miss O'Malley. The formality stung worse than outright anger would have. It wasn't what it seemed, if you would let me explain. No need, Brendan finally met her eyes, his gaze cold and distant. We all have secrets. You kept yours. I respect that. Before Harper could respond, her uncle called for her assistance with another miner. By the time she was free again, Brendan had already departed with the wagon of injured men, leaving his ranch hands to follow with her and Dr. Jacobs. Back in Silverridge, the clinic was chaotic with the influx of injured miners. Harper worked tirelessly alongside her uncle, focusing on the immediate needs before her rather than the emotional turmoil threatening to overwhelm her. It was nearly midnight before the last miner was stabilized. Dr. Jacobs insisted on remaining at the clinic to monitor the most critical cases, sending Harper home for much-needed rest. As she wearily made her way along the dark street, a figure stepped from the shadows, making her start. "A bit late for a lady to be walking alone, isn't it?" James Harrington's smooth voice set her teeth on edge. "I'm a nurse returning from treating injured men," Harper replied stiffly, hardly cause for concern. Harrington fell into step beside her. "I saw Scott earlier, quite the local hero, it seems, though rather rough around the edges." Harper increased her pace. "I'm too tired for this, Mr. Harrington. Say what you came to say and be done with it." "Very well," his tone hardened. "I've sent a telegram to your father, informing him of your whereabouts and my intention to return with you to Boston. I expect his reply tomorrow." Harper stopped short. "You had no right." "I had every right," Harrington countered. "Your father and mine had an agreement. Your impulsive departure caused significant embarrassment to both families. It's time to rectify that mistake." "I am not a mistake to be rectified," Harper said through clenched teeth. "I am a grown woman who made a choice about her own life." Harrington regarded her with cold amusement. "A temporary rebellion, nothing more. You don't belong here, Harper. Playing frontier nurse might be a charming diversion, but it's not your real life. Your real life is in Boston with me." "You don't love me," Harper said quietly. "You never did. I'm simply a suitable match on paper." "Love," Harrington laughed, "is that what you think you'll find out here? With that rough rancher who can barely string two sentences together? Don't be naive, Harper. People like us marry for position and advantage. Always have, always will." Harper lifted her chin. "I'd rather be alone than in a loveless marriage." "Noble sentiment," Harrington's voice dripped with condescension. "Let's see if you maintain it when your father loses everything he's built. The telegram I expect tomorrow should clarify where his priorities lie." With that parting shot, he tipped his hat mockingly and continued toward the hotel, leaving Harper standing in the darkened street, exhaustion and dread weighing equally upon her shoulders. The next morning brought no respite. Harper arrived at the clinic to find her uncle in serious conversation with Sheriff Miller, their expressions grave. "What's happened?" she asked, setting down her bag. The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Got a situation brewing, Miss O'Malley. That Boston fellow Harrington, he's making some bold moves. Announced at breakfast that he's buying controlling interest in the Carson mine." Harper frowned. "I don't see how that concerns me." "There's more," Dr. Jacobs said gently. "He's all spreading certain implications about your relationship, suggesting you came west with him, that there's an understanding between you." Heat rushed to Harper's face. "That's a lie. I came here to escape him." "I figured as much," the sheriff said, "but folks are curious by nature. Gossip spreads faster than wildfire out here." "Has he received a telegram from my father?" Harper asked, dreading the answer. "Came in this morning," Sheriff Miller confirmed. "Didn't see the contents, but Harrington seemed mighty pleased afterward." Harper closed her eyes briefly, imagining her father's likely response. Would he demand her return? Threaten consequences if she refused. The uncertainty was almost worse than knowing. "There's one more thing," her uncle added reluctantly. "Harrington approached Scott yesterday. Offered to buy his ranch at a price well above its value." This news hit Harper like a physical blow. What? Why would he do that? "Eliminate the competition, I'd wager," Sheriff Miller said shrewdly. "Man like that doesn't like obstacles." "Did Brendan agree?" Harper barely managed to ask. "Not yet, but word is it's a mighty tempting offer. More money than most men see in a lifetime." The implications staggered Harper. Harrington was systematically dismantling her life in Silverridge, poisoning her reputation, establishing himself as a powerful figure in the community, and now attempting to remove Brendan from the equation entirely. I need to speak with Brendan, she said urgently, before he makes any decision about the ranch. Dr. Jacobs looked troubled. Harper, are you sure that's wise? From what I've seen, Scott's been avoiding you rather deliberately. I don't care. He needs to know the truth about Harrington before he makes a decision he'll regret. The sheriff sighed. If you're determined, I heard Scott's in town today, meeting with his banker, then Harrington at the hotel at noon. Harper glanced at the clock. 11:30, I'll manage the clinic, uncle. Go, he said, understanding her urgency. Harper hurried through town toward the bank, hoping to intercept Brendan before his meeting with Harrington. As she rounded the corner, she spotted him emerging from the bank, expression grim as he checked his pocket watch. Brendan, she called, quickening her pace. He looked up, surprise briefly crossing his features before his expression closed again. Miss O'Malley, I'm in a hurry. Please just give me 5 minutes, Harper implored, stepping directly into his path. It's important. Brendan sighed, glancing again at his watch. 3 minutes, I have a meeting. I know, with Harrington. Harper took a deep breath. Don't sell your ranch to him, Brendan, please. His eyebrows rose. My business dealings are my own concern, Miss O'Malley. Not when they're motivated by lies, Harper countered. Harrington isn't what he seems. He's manipulative and vindictive. He's only offering to buy your ranch to eliminate you. Eliminate me, Brendan repeated skeptically. From what? The cattle business. From my life, Harper admitted, her voice dropping. He came to Silverridge because of me. To force me to return to Boston and fulfill an engagement I never agreed to. Understanding dawned slowly in Brendan's eyes. You ran from him. Harper nodded. My father arranged the match for business reasons. I refused. When Harrington wouldn't accept my decision, I left Boston. She met Brendan's gaze directly. I came west to escape a future I couldn't bear, not to hide a fiancé. Brendan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was ashamed, Harper confessed. Ashamed that I'd abandoned my father, ashamed that I wasn't brave enough to face the consequences directly, and later. Later I was afraid it would change how you saw me. And how do I see you, Harper? Brendan asked, his voice softer now. Harper's throat tightened with emotion. As someone worth trusting, I hoped. Someone who belongs here, despite where she came from. The town clock began to strike noon, breaking the moment. Brendan glanced toward the hotel, then back to Harper. I need to think, he said finally. This changes. A lot of things. Just promise me you won't agree to anything today, Harper pleaded. Give yourself time to consider what Harrington is really after. Brendan nodded slowly. I promise, he hesitated, then added, thank you for telling me the truth, Harper, even if it was overdue. As he walked away toward the hotel, Harper felt both relief and trepidation. She had finally shared her secret, but Harrington was still a formidable opponent. What would he do when he realized Brendan wasn't going to sell? The answer came sooner than expected. That evening, as Harper was walking home from the clinic, a familiar carriage pulled alongside her. The window lowered to reveal James Harrington, his expression coldly triumphant. Your rancher friend is more stubborn than I anticipated, he said without preamble, though perhaps that's your doing. Harper kept walking, refusing to engage. It doesn't matter, Harrington continued, the carriage rolling slowly beside her. I received your father's response this morning. Would you like to know what he said? Despite herself, Harper stopped. What did he say? Harrington smiled, withdrawing a telegram from his pocket. He's most anxious for your return. In fact, he's coming himself to escort you home. Should arrive within the week. The news stole Harper's breath. Her father coming to Colorado, it seemed impossible, and yet. I don't believe you, she said, though doubt crept into her voice. Harrington extended the telegram. See for yourself. The message was brief but unmistakably in her father's style. Relieved to learn of Harper's whereabouts. Stop ARRIVING Denver Pacific Railroad October 10th. Stop expect full explanation and return to Boston forthwith. Stop Jonathan O'Malley. Harper's hands trembled as she returned the paper. October 10th was just 5 days away. He'll listen to me, she said with more confidence than she felt, when I explain. Explain what? That you abandoned your family duty for a childish infatuation with frontier life. With a man who has nothing to offer someone of your standing, Harrington's voice was cold. Your father built his business from nothing. He understands sacrifice for family better than most. My father loves me, Harper insisted. He wouldn't force me into marriage against my will. Perhaps not, Harrington conceded, but he may well insist on your return to Boston regardless. Are you prepared to defy him to his face? To choose this dusty outpost over your own flesh and blood? The question struck at Harper's deepest vulnerability. For all her independence, she loved her father deeply. The thought of causing him pain by refusing to return home filled her with genuine anguish. Think carefully about your next steps, Harper, Harrington advised, his tone softening to false concern. There's still time to minimize the damage. Return to Boston willingly, fulfill your obligations with grace, and spare everyone unnecessary pain. As the carriage pulled away, Harper remained rooted in place, the weight of her father's impending arrival pressing down upon her like a physical burden. Everything she had built in Silverridge, her work at the clinic, her place in the community, her growing connection with Brendan, suddenly felt tenuous, threatened by the collision of her past and present. What would her father say when he saw her? Would he understand her choices, or would he side with Harrington, insisting on her return to fulfill family obligations? And Brendan, would he fight for her, or would he withdraw, unwilling to insert himself into a family conflict? Harper had fled Boston seeking freedom and purpose. Now, standing alone in the gathering dusk of a frontier town, she faced the hardest choice yet. Defy her father directly, or abandon the life and possibly the man she had come to love. News of Jonathan O'Malley's impending arrival spread through Silverridge with predictable speed. Harper found herself the subject of curious glances and hushed conversations wherever she went. James Harrington, meanwhile, continued to ingratiate himself with the town's business leaders, presenting himself as a harbinger of progress and prosperity. He's offered to fund a new schoolhouse, Sarah Jenkins informed Harper when she stopped by the clinic for headache powders, and improvements to the church. People are saying he might be just what Silverridge needs to grow. The implied comparison to Harper's own contribution wasn't lost on her. While she had worked tirelessly treating the town's sick and injured, Harrington was winning favor with grand gestures and promises of Eastern capital. How fortunate for Silverridge, Harper replied neutrally, wrapping the headache powders in paper. Sarah hesitated, then added, "There's talk that you two were, well, that you came west to escape an engagement. Is it true?" Harper met her gaze steadily. "Mr. Harrington and I were never formally engaged, despite what he might imply. My coming west was about finding my own path, not avoiding him specifically." It wasn't the complete truth, but it was as much as Harper was willing to share with the curious schoolteacher and Mr. Scott. "People are saying Harrington tried to buy his ranch." Sarah's eyes gleamed with interest. "You would have to ask Mr. Scott about his business affairs," Harper replied, her tone cooling noticeably. "They're hardly my concern." As Sarah departed with her medicine and thwarted curiosity, Harper sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The constant navigation of gossip and speculation was draining, particularly when combined with her anxiety about her father's arrival. She hadn't seen Brendan since their brief conversation outside the bank 3 days earlier. Whether he was deliberately avoiding town or simply busy at his ranch, Harper couldn't be certain. The uncertainty of where they stood only added to her growing sense of isolation. That evening, Dr. Jacobs found her sitting on the porch, staring unseeing at the darkening street. "A penny for your thoughts," he said gently, settling into the chair beside her. Harper managed a weak smile. "I'm not sure they're worth that much." "Worried about your father's arrival." When Harper nodded, he continued, "I remember Jonathan as a fair-minded man, if somewhat traditional in his views." "He'll listen to you, Harper." "I hope so," Harper sighed, "but he sacrificed so much to build his business, to give me opportunities. Walking away from the marriage he arranged, it must have seemed terribly selfish." Dr. Jacobs considered this, perhaps, but running a shipping company should have taught him that even the best-laid courses sometimes need adjustment when facing unexpected storms. "I'm the storm in this metaphor," Harper asked wryly. "More like the navigator who spotted rocks ahead that the captain missed," her uncle corrected. "You saw a future that wouldn't bring happiness and charted a different course." Harper leaned her head against the porch post. "I just wish I knew what Brendan was thinking, whether what we started means anything to him now that he knows about my past." Men like Scott don't open up easily, Dr. Jacobs observed. When they do, it matters. Give him time to sort through his thoughts. Time is the one thing I don't have, Harper replied sadly. Father arrives in 2 days. The following morning, Harper was checking supplies when the clinic door opened to reveal Mrs. Reynolds, Brendan's housekeeper, looking flustered and out of breath. Mrs. Reynolds, is everything all right? Harper asked, immediately concerned. It's Maria Garcia, the older woman explained. Her time has come early and there are complications. Mr. Scott sent me to fetch you right away. Harper was already reaching for her medical bag. I'll saddle a horse immediately. No need, Mr. Scott sent the buggy with me, it's faster. Within minutes, they were rattling along the road toward the Scott ranch, Mrs. Reynolds explaining the situation in more detail. Eduardo came to the main house at dawn, beside himself with worry. Maria's pains started during the night, but the baby isn't coming right. Mr. Scott rode out himself to check on her, then sent me for you. How far along is she? Harper asked, mentally calculating what supplies she might need. The pains have been regular for hours, but there's no sign of the baby yet, and there's blood, more than there should be. Harper's concern deepened. Despite her best efforts to correctly position Maria's baby during her visit, something had clearly gone wrong. A breech birth or placental issue could quickly become life-threatening for both mother and child. When they arrived at the Garcia cabin, Harper found Brendan outside, deep in conversation with Eduardo. Both men looked up as the buggy approached, relief evident in their expressions. Thank God you've come, Eduardo said, rushing forward to help Harper down. Maria is suffering greatly. Brendan's eyes met Harper's briefly. I've sent for your uncle as well, but you were closer. Harper nodded, all personal concerns forgotten in the face of the medical emergency. I'll do everything I can. Has her water broken? Yes, hours ago, Eduardo confirmed, leading her inside. The interior of the cabin was stifling, the air heavy with the metallic scent of blood. Maria lay on the bed, her face contorted with pain, her skin ashen beneath its natural olive tone. A quick examination confirmed Harper's worst fears. The baby was in distress, and Maria was hemorrhaging. I need clean water as much as possible and all the clean linens you have, Harper instructed Eduardo, and I need the children taken elsewhere. As Eduardo rushed to comply, Harper turned to Brendan, who had followed them inside. The baby is positioned wrong and Maria is losing blood. I can try to turn it, but... She didn't need to finish the grim assessment. Brendan nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Whatever you need, just ask. For the next hour, Harper worked tirelessly, using every skill she possessed to save Maria and her child. Brendan remained, following Harper's instructions without question, his steady presence a source of unexpected strength as the situation grew increasingly dire. When Maria's screams gave way to weakness and semi-consciousness, Harper made the most difficult decision of her medical career. The baby won't come naturally, she told Brendan quietly. If we don't remove it surgically, both will die. Brendan's face paled, a cesarean here. Harper nodded grimly. I've assisted with the procedure in Boston, but never performed it alone. The risks are enormous, but without it, there's no hope. After a moment's hesitation, Brendan squared his shoulders. Tell me what to do. With Eduardo's tearful consent obtained, Harper prepared for the dangerous procedure. She sterilized her instruments in boiling water and administered what little chloroform she had to dull Maria's pain. Hold her steady, she instructed Brendan, who positioned himself at Maria's shoulders. No matter what happens, she cannot move during the incision. As Harper made the first cut, she was acutely aware of the lives literally in her hands, Maria's, the baby's, and in some way her own. If she failed here in this remote cabin with limited supplies and experience, the weight of that failure would haunt her forever. But there was no room for doubt. Her hands moved with practiced precision, her mind focused entirely on the task before her. Brendan remained steady at her side, his quiet strength anchoring her through the ordeal. When the baby finally emerged, a tiny boy, silent and blue, Harper's heart sank. But as she cleared the infant's airways and rubbed his chest vigorously, a miracle occurred. A small gasp followed by the most beautiful cry Harper had ever heard. He's alive, she whispered, tears blurring her vision as she quickly wrapped the newborn in clean linen. Brendan, he's alive. The joy was short-lived as her attention returned to Maria, who was losing blood at an alarming rate. For another desperate hour, Harper fought to save the mother as she had saved the child, her determination never wavering despite the increasingly hopeless situation. When Dr. Jacobs finally arrived, it was nearly too late. Together they worked frantically, employing every technique available to stem the hemorrhaging. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the cabin windows, Maria's bleeding finally slowed, then stopped. Her pulse, though weak, stabilized. "She'll live," Dr. Jacobs pronounced, exhaustion evident in his voice. "It's a miracle, but she'll live." Outside the cabin, as Eduardo held his newborn son with wonder and gratitude, Harper finally allowed herself to acknowledge the toll of the day's events. Her hands were shaking, her dress ruined with blood, and the emotional strain of balancing on the knife's edge between life and death had left her utterly drained. "You should sit before you fall," Brendan said quietly, appearing at her side with a cup of coffee. Harper accepted it gratefully, sinking onto a rough-hewn bench. "I thought I'd lost them both," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "I've never been so frightened." "But you didn't lose them," Brendan pointed out. "You fought for them when most would have given up. You saved them both." He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. For several minutes they remained in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Your father arrives tomorrow," Brendan finally said. Harper nodded, reality intruding on the momentary peace. "Yes, what will you tell him?" It was the question she'd been asking herself for days, with no clear answer forthcoming. "The truth, I suppose, that I've found purpose here, that I can't return to a life where my only value is as a business asset." Brendan turned to face her, his expression serious. "And if he insists?" Harper met his gaze directly. "Then I'll have a difficult choice to make." "Between your father and Silverridge," Brendan asked, something unreadable in his voice. "Between obligation and freedom," Harper corrected. "Between the path others have chosen for me and the one I've found for myself." Another silence fell between them, weighted with unspoken questions. "I refused Harrington's offer for the ranch," Brendan said suddenly. "Told him it wasn't for sale at any price." Harper's heart lifted slightly, "Because of what I told you about him." "Partly," Brendan admitted, "but mostly because that land is more than property to me. It's who I am, what I've built. What I want to," he hesitated, then finished, "what I want to pass on someday." The implication that he was thinking of a future, of legacy, wasn't lost on Harper. "I understand," she said softly. "Some things can't be measured in dollars." Brendan's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his calloused palm rough against her skin. "Harper, I don't know what tomorrow will bring with your father's arrival. I don't know if you'll stay or go. But I need you to know that what's grown between us these past months, it matters to me." The simple declaration, so at odds with his usual reticence, moved Harper deeply. "It matters to me too, Brendan, more than I can say." He squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But I hope," his voice roughened with emotion, "I hope you find reason enough to stay." As Dr. Jacobs emerged from the cabin, announcing they should leave Maria to rest, Harper felt a curious sense of clarity descending. The day's events, standing at the precipice between life and death, making choices that determined others' fates, had crystallized something within her. Whatever her father might say, whatever pressure Harrington might apply, Harper knew with sudden certainty that her place was here, in this wild territory where her skills were needed, where she had found purpose, and perhaps most importantly, where she had found a man who saw her true worth beyond family connections or societal expectations. The question that remained was whether she would have the courage to stand by that conviction when faced with her father's disappointment. As they rode back to the main house, the baby's cry still echoing in her memory, Harper prayed she would find the strength to choose her own path, whatever the cost. The Denver Pacific train arrived in Silverridge precisely at noon the following day, its whistle piercing the crisp autumn air as it pulled into the small station. Harper stood on the platform, her hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. "Doctor." Jacobs a reassuring presence at her side. James Harrington had insisted on being present for Jonathan O'Malley's arrival, positioning himself nearby with the air of a man confident in his victory. Harper had pointedly ignored him, focusing instead on controlling the riot of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. As the train hissed to a stop and passengers began to disembark, Harper's eyes scanned anxiously for her father's familiar figure. When he finally appeared, tall and distinguished despite the travel dust, his beard more gray than she remembered, her heart constricted with a potent mixture of love and dread. "Father," she called, stepping forward. Jonathan O'Malley turned at the sound of her voice, his stern expression softening momentarily. "Harper." She moved toward him, uncertain whether to embrace him or maintain formal distance. The decision was made for her when her father opened his arms, drawing her into a brief but tight hug. "You look well," he said, holding her at arm's length to study her. "The Western air agrees with you, it seems." Before Harper could respond, Harrington stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. O'Malley, welcome to Silverridge. I trust your journey was comfortable." Jonathan shook the offered hand with noticeably less warmth than his greeting to his daughter. "As comfortable as 30 hours on a train can be, Harrington. I appreciate your telegram informing me of Harper's whereabouts." Dr. Jacobs approached, his expression friendly but measured. "Jonathan. It's been many years." "Thomas," Jonathan nodded to his brother-in-law. "You've been harboring my runaway daughter, I see." "Providing her a home and valuable medical experience," Dr. Jacobs corrected mildly. "She's become quite indispensable to the community." Harrington made a dismissive noise. "Charming as this reunion is, perhaps we should continue it somewhere more comfortable. I've arranged rooms for you at the hotel, Mr. O'Malley, and reserved the private dining room for lunch." "That won't be necessary," Harper interjected firmly. "Father will be staying with Uncle Thomas and me. We have plenty of room and much to discuss as a family." Jonathan looked between them, sensing the underlying tension. "I appreciate both offers, but I believe family should take precedence. I'll stay with Thomas and Harper. As for lunch, I could certainly use a good meal after that train fare." The walk to the hotel restaurant was strained, with Harrington attempting to monopolize Jonathan's attention with talk of business opportunities in the territory. Harper remained silent, gathering her thoughts for the inevitable confrontation to come. Once seated in the private dining room, with orders placed and initial pleasantries exhausted, Jonathan turned to his daughter with a directness that had always characterized their relationship. "I think it's time you explained yourself, Harper. Leaving without a proper goodbye, abandoning your responsibilities, causing your family significant embarrassment, these aren't actions I ever expected from you." Harper met his gaze steadily. "I left a letter explaining my reasons." A letter, Jonathan's tone made clear what he thought of that gesture. A few hastily written lines about needing independence and being unable to marry James. Hardly a sufficient explanation for appending multiple lives and business arrangements. "I couldn't face you directly," Harper admitted. "I knew you would try to convince me to stay, to fulfill the arrangement you'd made with Mr. Harrington's father, and I knew I would be tempted to comply out of duty to you, even at the cost of my own happiness." Jonathan frowned. "Marriage isn't primarily about happiness, Harper. It's about building alliances, securing futures, creating stability. Your mother and I didn't love each other when we wed, but we built a good life together." "And I'm grateful for that life," Harper said sincerely. "For every advantage you provided me, but I couldn't agree to a marriage where I was viewed as nothing more than a business asset." Harrington, who had been listening with barely concealed impatience, interjected, "That's hardly a fair characterization, Harper. The arrangement would have benefited both families considerably. Your father's shipping company needs capital for expansion, capital my family can provide." "So I was to be sold to secure financing," Harper said flatly. "How is that not being treated as an asset?" Jonathan's expression tightened. "That's enough, Harper. You speak of things you don't fully understand. The alliance with the Harringtons represents security for our family business, the business that educated you, that would provide for your children." "There are other ways to secure financing," Harper countered. "Ways that don't involve sacrificing my future happiness." "And what of my happiness?" her father asked quietly. "My pride, do you know what it was like explaining your disappearance to our friends, to the Harringtons?" The speculation, the whispers. Guilt stabbed at Harper's heart. "I never wanted to hurt you, father, but I couldn't live the life you had planned for me, not when I knew there was another path. And this other path, playing frontier nurse in a town barely on the map, this is what you prefer to the life and family that raised you." Jonathan's voice held genuine bewilderment. I'm not playing at anything, Harper replied with quiet dignity. I'm using my training to help people who desperately need medical care. I've delivered babies, treated mining injuries, saved lives that would have been lost without intervention. She leaned forward earnestly. For the first time in my life, I'm valued for my skills and character, not for my family connections or marriage prospects. Jonathan studied her face, noting the passion and conviction in her expression. Something in his own features softened slightly. Your mother was similarly stubborn. She always said you inherited that from me, though I denied it. The mention of her mother created a moment of shared remembrance between them, a brief bridging of the gulf that had opened since Harper's departure. Harrington, sensing the shift, attempted to regain control of the conversation. Sentiment aside, there are practical matters to consider. The agreement between our families was never formalized, Harper interrupted. No announcements were made, no contracts signed. But understandings were reached, Harrington persisted, his charm giving way to harder edges. Commitments implied. Your father's company has already benefited from preliminary investments based on those understandings. Jonathan sighed heavily. He's not wrong, Harper. The Harrington capital has been essential these past months. If it were withdrawn. The implied threat hung in the air, confirming Harper's worst fears about Harrington's tactics. He was using her father's business as leverage to force her compliance. So I am to sacrifice my life to save the family business, Harper said, the bitter irony not lost on her. Tell me, father, is that truly what mother would have wanted for me? Jonathan flinched slightly at the direct invocation of his late wife. Before he could respond, the door to the private dining room opened to admit a server with their meals. The interruption provided a temporary respite from the mounting tension, allowing everyone to collect their thoughts. As they ate, the conversation turned to more neutral topics: Jonathan's journey west, Dr. Jacob's medical practice, the growth of Silverridge in recent years. Harper participated minimally, her appetite diminished by the unresolved conflict simmering beneath the surface. When the meal concluded, Harrington excused himself to attend to business matters, suggesting they continue their discussion at dinner. Once he had departed, the atmosphere in the room lightened perceptibly. He's exactly as I remembered, Doctor. Jacobs remarked dryly, confident to the point of arrogance. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. He's ambitious and well-connected, qualities that serve a businessman well. But perhaps not a husband, Harper ventured cautiously. Her father regarded her thoughtfully. You truly find him so objectionable? It's not a matter of objection, father. I simply don't love him. I don't even particularly like him. Harper held her father's gaze. Would you have wanted that for mother, a marriage devoid of affection or respect? Jonathan was silent for a long moment. Your mother and I were fortunate. What began as a practical arrangement grew into genuine love. I had hoped the same might happen for you. With James Harrington, Harper couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. He views women as accessories, father, possessions to be acquired and displayed. You're being unfair, Jonathan chided, though with less conviction than before. Dr. Jacobs cleared his throat. Perhaps a walk might be in order. Jonathan could see something of Silverridge, and you both could continue your discussion in private. The suggestion was sensible, and soon Harper and her father were strolling along Silverridge's main street, drawing curious glances from townsfolk eager for gossip about the doctor's niece and her distinguished visitor. It's smaller than I expected, Jonathan observed, taking in the modest buildings and dusty thoroughfare. Rougher, too. It's growing, Harper replied, and the people here are good, father, hardworking, honest. They look out for each other. Jonathan nodded absently, his mind clearly on other matters. Harper, you must understand the position you've placed me in. The Harrington investment isn't merely helpful, it's essential. Without it, the expansion I've undertaken would collapse, possibly taking the entire company with it. Harper's heart sank, so I have no choice. There are always choices, her father said, surprising her. But each comes with consequences that must be weighed carefully. They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country. In the distance, the mountains rose majestically against the blue sky, their peaks already dusted with early snow. It's beautiful here, Jonathan admitted, in a wild, untamed way. It suits me, Harper said softly. I've found something here I never had in Boston: independence, purpose. Her father studied her profile, noting the strength that had developed in his once sheltered daughter. "And is there something or someone else that binds you to this place?" The question caught Harper off guard. "What do you mean?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "I'm not blind, Harper. Nor am I unfamiliar with the look of a woman torn between duty and heart. Is there a young man?" Harper hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "There's someone. It's complicated." "Most worthwhile things are," her father observed. "Tell me about him." As they turned back toward town, Harper found herself speaking of Brendan, his strength, his integrity, the walls he'd built around himself, and the glimpses she'd had of the man beneath them. She described his ranch, his devotion to those under his protection, and the gradual thawing of his reserve as they'd grown closer. Jonathan listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When Harper finished, he asked only, "And does this rancher return your feelings?" "I believe so," Harper answered honestly, though he's not a man to speak easily of such things. "I'd like to meet him," Jonathan said unexpectedly. "This man who's captured my daughter's interest where James Harrington failed." Before Harper could respond, a commotion further down the street caught their attention. A group of men had gathered outside the hotel, their voices raised in what appeared to be a heated argument. As they drew closer, Harper recognized Brendan among them, facing off against James Harrington and several others she didn't immediately identify. "Speaking of your rancher," Jonathan murmured, "he appears to be in some sort of altercation." Harper quickened her pace, concern rising as she noted the tension in Brendan's posture and the angry flush on Harrington's face. "Have no right to interfere in legitimate business," Harrington was saying as they approached. "The Carson mine needs investment to operate safely, investment I'm prepared to provide." "At the cost of the miners' independence," Brendan countered, his voice level but hard. "Your contract would cut their pay by a third while doubling their hours. That's not investment, it's exploitation." Harrington's smile was cold. "It's business, Scott, something you frontier types struggle to understand. Sentimentality has no place in commerce." "Nor does basic human decency, apparently," Brendan retorted. Noticing Harper and Jonathan's approach, Harrington's demeanor shifted instantly to one of polished courtesy. "Ah, Mr. O'Malley, I see you're getting acquainted with our little town. I was just discussing some business arrangements with the local interests." Jonathan assessed the situation with a businessman's shrewd eye. "So I see. And who might this gentleman be?" Before Harrington could answer, Brendan stepped forward, extending his hand. "Brendan Scott, sir. I own a cattle ranch outside of town." "Mr. Scott," Jonathan shook the offered hand, his gaze evaluative. "My daughter has mentioned you." Something flickered in Brendan's eyes as he glanced briefly at Harper. "All good things, I hope." "She speaks highly of your character," Jonathan replied neutrally. "Though she neglected to mention you were at odds with Mr. Harrington." Harrington interjected smoothly, "Merely a disagreement about progress, Mr. O'Malley. Mr. Scott represents the traditional elements in Silverridge. I represent its future." "A future where miners work themselves to death for starvation wages," Brendan said flatly. Jonathan's interest was clearly piqued. Perhaps someone might explain the exact nature of this disagreement. "I have some experience with labor negotiations in my shipping business." The suggestion led to an impromptu meeting in the hotel lobby, where Harrington reluctantly laid out his proposed terms for investing in the Carson mine. Jonathan listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed a sharp business mind behind his gentlemanly exterior. Harper observed the exchange with growing admiration for her father's acumen and Brendan's principled stand. As the discussion progressed, it became increasingly clear that Harrington's proposal was indeed exploitative, designed to maximize profit at the expense of the workers' well-being. "This contract is unconscionable," Jonathan finally pronounced. "No responsible businessman would propose such terms." Harrington's face darkened. "With all due respect, Mr. O'Malley, you're a visitor here. You don't understand the economic realities of frontier mining operations." "I understand predatory practices when I see them," Jonathan replied coolly. "My shipping company employs hundreds of men. I've learned that fair treatment yields greater loyalty and productivity than exploitation ever could." The rebuke was unexpected, and Harrington struggled momentarily to maintain his composure. I had thought we might find common ground in our approach to business, given our families' aligned interests. Our families have no aligned interests that I'm aware of, Jonathan said firmly. Any preliminary discussions have been rendered moot by recent revelations. The implication was clear. Jonathan was withdrawing from the potential business arrangement with the Harringtons. The realization dawned on Harrington's face, quickly followed by barely contained fury. I see Harper has been busy poisoning your mind against me, he said tightly. I wonder if she's been equally forthcoming about her frontier adventures. Careful, Harrington, Brendan warned, stepping forward. Harrington's smile was malicious. Oh, has she not told you, Mr. O'Malley? Your daughter has formed quite an attachment to our local rancher. Quite scandalous, really, for a woman of her background to consort with. The rest of his statement was cut off as Brendan's fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward into a settee. The lobby erupted in shocked exclamations as Harrington touched his split lip, eyes blazing with rage. You'll regret that, Scott, he hissed. I'll bury you in your worthless ranch. Enough, Jonathan's authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Harrington, I suggest you retire to your room before you say something truly unforgivable. Mr. Scott, while I understand your impulse, violence rarely resolves anything. Brendan straightened, his expression contrite as he turned to Jonathan. You're right, sir. I apologize for my behavior, though not for defending Harper's honor. Harrington rose unsteadily, dabbing at his bleeding lip with a handkerchief. This isn't over, he promised before stalking toward the stairs, dignity in tatters. As the onlookers dispersed, murmuring excitedly about the confrontation, Jonathan turned to Harper and Brendan with a mixture of exasperation and grudging respect. I believe you and I have much to discuss, young man, he said to Brendan, perhaps over dinner, without Mr. Harrington's presence to complicate matters. The invitation was unexpected but welcome. Brendan nodded, a hint of nervousness visible beneath his usual composure. I'd be honored, sir. As they left the hotel, Harper found herself walking between the two most important men in her life, one from her past, one potentially in her future. The confrontation with Harrington had unexpectedly accelerated matters, forcing issues into the open that might otherwise have remained unspoken for much longer. That evening, over a private dinner at Dr. Jacob's home, Jonathan O'Malley heard the full story of his daughter's time in Silverridge, her work at the clinic, her growing attachment to the community, and most significantly, her developing relationship with Brendan Scott. For his part, Brendan spoke frankly of his own past, his father's murder, his determination to rebuild the ranch, and his gradual realization that a life of self-imposed isolation was no life at all. I built walls to protect myself, he admitted, meeting Jonathan's evaluative gaze directly. Harper showed me they were really a prison of my own making. Jonathan considered this thoughtfully. And your intentions toward my daughter? Brendan glanced at Harper, something profound and unspoken passing between them before he turned back to her father. I love her, sir. I didn't plan to fight against it, truth be told. But if she'll have me, I intend to ask for her hand. The simple declaration, made without flourish or calculation, brought tears to Harper's eyes. This was Brendan at his most authentic, straightforward, honorable, his feelings expressed without artifice or manipulation. Jonathan was silent for a long moment, studying the man across the table with the careful assessment of a father weighing his daughter's future happiness. You understand, I came here expecting to bring Harper home, he finally said. To resolve what I saw as a temporary rebellion and restore order to our family plans. Harper tensed, preparing for the conflict she had dreaded since learning of her father's impending arrival. But I find instead, Jonathan continued, surprising her, a daughter who has not only found her path but has walked it with courage and conviction. And a man who values her for precisely the qualities I've always admired in her, her intelligence, her determination, her compassion. He reached across the table to take Harper's hand. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, Harper. Far prouder than if you'd made a suitable match that crushed your spirit. Then you're not insisting I return to Boston? Harper asked, hardly daring to believe the turn events had taken. Jonathan shook his head. No. Your life is here now, I can see that clearly. though I will expect regular letters and occasional visits," he added with a small smile. Relief and joy washed over Harper. "Of course. And you're welcome here any time, Father." "As for Harrington," Jonathan said, his expression hardening slightly, "I'll deal with him and his father. The O'Malley shipping line survived before their investment. It will survive without it." "I wish I could help," Harper said, genuine regret in her voice. "I never wanted to cause difficulties for the business." "You let me worry about the business," her father assured her. "You focus on building your life here, your medical practice, your future with Mr. Scott, if that's what you choose." Later that night, after Jonathan had retired and Dr. Jacobs had tactfully made himself scarce, Harper and Brendan found themselves alone on the porch, the events of the day still reverberating between them. "You punched James Harrington," Harper said, amusement coloring her voice. "Rather thoroughly." Brendan flexed his slightly bruised knuckles. "He deserved worse for how he spoke about you." "My father was impressed, I think," Harper mused, though he felt obligated to disapprove publicly. "And what about you?" Brendan asked, suddenly serious. "Were you impressed?" Harper considered the question honestly. "I was touched by your defense, though violence isn't typically my preferred solution. But more than that, I was moved by what you said afterward." "To my father." Brendan took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns across her palm. "I meant every word, Harper. I do love you. I think I have since that day at the creek when you risked everything to save that boy. I just wasn't ready to admit it, even to myself." "And now," Harper asked softly, "now I'm ready to admit everything." Brendan's blue eyes held her steadily. "That I've been afraid of losing people since my father died, that I built a life around avoiding that pain. That meeting you shattered all my careful plans for isolation." He smiled ruefully. "You walked into Silverridge and somehow passed every defense I'd constructed, made me remember what it felt like to care about someone so much that the risk of loss seemed worth taking." Harper felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I came west running away from one future, never imagining I might find another so much more precious." "You don't have to love me," Brendan said, echoing words she had once spoken to a frightened patient. "I know I'm not what your father envisioned for you. I'm not wealthy or cultured or—" "Too late," Harper whispered, cutting him off as she leaned forward to touch his face. "I already do." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged beneath the vast canopy of stars that stretched endlessly above the frontier they both now called home. What had begun as Harper's flight from an unwanted future had led, by the most unexpected path, to the very thing she hadn't known she was seeking, not just independence but connection, not merely escape but belonging. Not simply freedom from, but freedom to love, to heal, to build a life shaped by choice rather than obligation. As Brendan drew her closer, his arms strong and sure around her, Harper knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place but in a person. In the heart of a man who had opened his carefully guarded soul to her, offering a love as vast and untamed as the western landscape they both cherished. The morning after Jonathan O'Malley's unexpected blessing of his daughter's new life, James Harrington departed Silverridge on the eastbound train, his ambitious plans for investment and revenge alike thoroughly thwarted. While gossip suggested he had threatened legal action against Brendan for the assault, nothing ever came of it. Jonathan's quiet intervention with Harrington's father had apparently resolved the matter permanently. Jonathan remained in Silverridge for 2 more days, using the time to become better acquainted with the community his daughter had adopted and the man she had chosen. Before departing, he took Brendan aside for a private conversation that left the rancher looking thoughtful but determined. "What did my father say to you?" Harper asked as they watched the train pull away, carrying Jonathan back toward Denver and eventually Boston. Brendan smiled slightly. "He said if I didn't treat his daughter with the respect and devotion she deserved, he'd come back and show me exactly how he'd maintained discipline on his ships during 30 years at sea." Harper laughed, knowing her father's gruff affection when she heard it. And he gave me his mother's wedding ring," Brendan added quietly, patting his vest pocket. "Said it should stay in the family, even if that family was now extending west rather than east." The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on Harper. Her father had not merely accepted her choice, he had embraced it, giving his blessing in the most tangible way possible. The weeks that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Harper. Her work at the clinic continued, more fulfilling than ever now that she knew with certainty that Silverridge was her home. Brendan rode into town more frequently, their courtship conducted in full view of the community's interested eyes. Maria Garcia and her infant son, whom she had named Brendan Eduardo in honor of the two men who had ensured their survival, thrived under Harper's continued care. The young family became a symbol to Harper of all that she had gained in coming west, the opportunity to make a real difference, to save lives that might otherwise have been lost, to be valued for her skills rather than her social position. Winter descended on the territory with characteristic suddenness, transforming the landscape with a blanket of pristine snow. As Christmas approached, Silverridge prepared for its annual celebration, the entire town gathering to decorate the church and plan festivities that would bring light to the darkest days of the year. Harper found herself unexpectedly busy with preparations for a holiday celebration at the Scott Ranch. Brendan had invited not only Dr. Jacobs but also several families from town, including the Garcias and others who might otherwise have spent the holiday alone. "The house hasn't seen a proper Christmas since my mother died," Brendan explained as they rode out to the ranch 2 days before the planned gathering. "It's time to change that." The main house had been transformed under Mrs. Reynolds' direction, greenery adorning the staircase and mantels, candles ready to be lit in every window. A massive pine tree stood in the corner of the parlor, awaiting decorations that Mrs. Reynolds had carefully preserved from happier times. As they worked together, hanging ornaments, delicate glass balls, and carved wooden figures that had belonged to Brendan's mother, Harper felt a profound sense of rightness, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into their proper places. "My father used to lift me up to place the star," Brendan said, holding up a tarnished silver ornament shaped like the Star of Bethlehem, "before things changed between us, before he became different." It was the most he had ever shared about the strained relationship with his father, and Harper recognized the significance of the confidence. "Different how?" she asked gently, accepting the star from his hands. Brendan's expression grew distant. The war with Mexico changed him. He saw things, did things that haunted him, started drinking heavily, became paranoid that others were trying to steal what he'd built. He sighed heavily. "By the time I was old enough to understand, he'd alienated most of our neighbors with accusations and threats." "That must have been difficult for you and your mother," Harper observed. "She protected me as best she could after she died." Things deteriorated further. Brendan's hands stilled on the branch he had been arranging. "The night he was killed, we'd argued bitterly. I'd just returned from the Union Army, found the ranch in disarray, workers gone, cattle neglected. I confronted him about it." The pain in his voice was still raw, even after so many years. "The last words I spoke to him were in anger. The next morning I found him shot dead near the property line." Harper touched his arm gently. "You couldn't have known what would happen, Brendan." "No," he agreed quietly, "but I've carried that guilt nonetheless, wondering if I could have prevented it somehow, if I'd been more patient, more understanding of his demons." "Is that why you rebuilt the ranch so determinedly?" "To honor his memory." Brendan considered this, partly, but also to prove something to myself, that I could create something better than what he left behind, something he would have been proud of if he'd been the man he was before the war. As the final decorations were placed, Brendan stepped back to survey their work. The tree glowed with candlelight, the ornaments casting delicate shadows across the room. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, adding to the hushed, expectant atmosphere. "It's beautiful," Harper said softly. Brendan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It is, but something's missing." Before Harper could ask what he meant, he reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that he placed carefully in her hand. "Brendan." Harper's heart began to race as she looked from the box to his face. "Open it," he urged quietly. Inside lay a ring, not her grandmother's heirloom that her father had given him, but something different. A delicate gold band set with a small but perfect diamond, flanked by 2 tiny sapphires. "It was my mother's," Brendan explained, "not her wedding ring that was sold during hard times after her death, but a ring my father gave her on their 10th anniversary when the ranch was finally prospering. I found it among her things after he died, kept it safe all these years." Harper looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "It's beautiful." "I thought about using your grandmother's ring," Brendan continued, taking the box back and removing the ring. "But that represents your past, your family." This, he held up the ring, the stones catching the candlelight. This represents what I hope will be our future, built on the foundation of what came before, but uniquely ours. He took her hand, his own trembling slightly. Harper O'Malley, when you came to Silverridge, I was a man who believed the only way to survive was to remain alone. You showed me how wrong I was. You challenged my every defense, healed hurts I didn't know could be mended, and made me believe in possibilities I'd long since abandoned. Kneeling before her, still holding her hand, Brendan looked up with such naked vulnerability that Harper's breath caught. I love you, will you marry me, make a life with me here on this land, have children with me, grow old with me, face whatever comes together. The tears Harper had been holding back spilled freely now. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly, yes, Brendan, yes to all of it. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, Harper felt the final pieces of her journey falling into place. From Boston society daughter to frontier nurse to beloved partner, each step had brought her closer to the truth of who she was meant to be. Their kiss, illuminated by candlelight and witnessed only by the ghosts of the past and promises of the future, sealed a covenant that had begun with a challenge and a whispered response. You don't have to love me, she had said. Too late, he had whispered back. The Christmas gathering at the Scott Ranch became a celebration of more than the holiday. It became an announcement of their engagement, a public declaration of the love that had grown between them despite all odds. As friends and neighbors filled the house with laughter and good wishes, Harper looked around at the community that had become her own and felt a completeness she had never known in Boston. Dr. Jacobs raised a glass in toast, his eyes twinkling with approval. To Harper and Brendan, may the love you found here on the frontier be as enduring as these mountains and as boundless as these skies. Later, as the last guests departed and quiet descended once more on the ranch house, Brendan led Harper onto the porch to gaze at the star-filled sky. Snow continued to fall softly around them, each flake a tiny miracle of perfect design. Happy, he asked, his arms secure around her waist. Harper leaned into his embrace, the weight of her journey, from reluctant bride-to-be to woman who had chosen her own destiny, finally lifting completely. Completely, she answered truthfully. I came west seeking freedom, never imagining I would find home instead. Brendan's arms tightened around her. Not just a home, he corrected gently, a future. Our future. As they stood together in the quiet of the winter night, the vastness of the territory stretching before them and the warmth of the home they would share behind them, Harper knew that her father had been right. Her mother would indeed be proud of the woman she had become, a woman brave enough to defy convention, strong enough to forge her own path, and wise enough to recognize true love when she found it, even in the most unexpected place. The frontier had tested them both, stripping away pretenses and forcing them to confront their deepest fears. But in doing so, it had revealed the essential truth that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. That walls built to protect can become prisons, that vulnerability requires the greatest courage, and that love, real love, is never a weakness but the greatest strength of all. You don't have to love me, she had once said, offering freedom where others had offered only obligation. Too late, he had whispered back, offering in return the most precious gift of all, a heart once closed, now opened fully. A life once isolated, now joyfully shared, and in that exchange was everything they had both been seeking, though neither had known to name it, not just love but belonging, not just passion but purpose. Not just a moment's connection, but a lifetime's journey together on the ever-wild, ever-promising frontier they now both called home.